Okay. Here we are live again for another political chat with me, Monica Cardenas. You can always catch us on Substack, Gadfly City, and we are on YouTube at Gadfly City and gadflycity.com. And this week I am here with Dick Pullman. He's a writer in residence at the University of Pennsylvania. And for 20 years, he was the national political writer at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and then a political columnist for NPR in Philadelphia. And he now writes a weekly column at dickpullman.substack.com. And this week, we are talking about his column from last week, which was on the Swalwell fallout, which he will tell us all about in case you are not up to speed on that. So welcome, Dick. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Monica. Thanks for calling me.
Do you want to give us sort of a quick rundown of Swalwell's demise so everyone's on the same page here?
Sure. And it was quick. So this would be almost in real time. He was, was a very visible California Democratic congressman. He was like a cable TV regular, an avowed critic of Donald Trump, and was considered the leading candidate for the Democratic nomination, gubernatorial nomination in California, which is done by the primary system. And shortly before the final stretch in the primaries, he was hit with several very serious sexual assault allegations that came out in very detailed press reports in the San Francisco Chronicle and at CNN. Which are CNN's is very easily gettable for any reader. San Francisco Chronicle is behind a paywall, a little bit more difficult. But what ended up happening was once those press reports hit, and he started making the usual rote, vociferous protestations and saying it was all, made up and fake, which nobody really believed at that point because these details were just so egregious and just nauseating, seriously, that almost overnight, his very extensive support among a lot of very prominent people, including congressmen, just disappeared. Democrats just ran away within like really just several days. It was like the stories broke on a Thursday and a Friday, and by Sunday night, he was finished.
Mm,
This was a couple weeks ago.
yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you sparing us the gory details of what, women have accused him of. Um, how did the story kind of first break? And by that, I mean, I know you said which publications reported on it, but where did, these women come from, and why do you think the story came out now?
Right.
Because from what I understand, there have been sort of rumors about the kinda guy he is for
Yeah,
a while.
and we can talk about that, because
Mm,
that's part of the dynamic of all these of what happened. Uh, uh, you know, I think what the fatal error he made was, running for governor, and, raising his visibility so high that, a number of women at that point just felt, "We just can't let this go."
mm,
When he was a congressman and in a safe district and could get reelected and a safe seat and yeah, he was on cable TV that frankly not as many people watch as we think.
mm,
Um, I think basically these women were, I think, ready to just sort of like let it go because it's very traumatic to come forward and put yourself in the crosshairs. But I think he had almost a Shakespearean flaw here. I'm gonna mix my literary metaphors. Shakespearean flaw, but also he's Icarus, who flew too close to the sun and he got burned. And
mm,
he went up so high that finally uh, uh, they they couldn't abide it anymore. And I think at that point, I don't know the details of how these press outlets reached out to these women, or if the women reached out to them.
mhm,
But I think at the final analysis, I think it was just because he was becoming so prominent uh, that they couldn't. These women could not let it go, and so they
yeah,
came forward. And as you probably know, even after he stepped down, a couple days after that, another woman came forward
mhm,
by name and had a press conference with her attorney and said she was going to turn over whatever evidence she felt she had her
mhm,
testimony to the police, to a sheriff, I think it was.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's kind of the point of the essay you wrote last week on your Substack was about how Democrats and Republicans seem to have a different way of handling these sorts of controversies.
Right, right,
Um, and that it seems, at least in this case, that Dems have held their people to a higher standard. As you said, it took like a day and a half for everyone to drop him, to run away from him. So, can you talk a little bit about that
yeah.
comparison that you made?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's something I've been kind of following for a while, and I think I referenced some of this in the piece. Is that when when Senator Al Franken was spotlighted for some inappropriate touching that he had made. Apparently, it was like 10 years earlier, 10 years before the allegations, including some really juvenile behavior with photo that was captured in photographs.
Mm,
Um, Something like 30 senators wanted him gone immediately, and he fought it and finally gave up. So there have been a number of other incidents. There have been John Conyers, a congressman from Michigan, the Attorney General of New York State, Eric Schneiderman,
mhm,
uh, and I think what has happened, the pattern is that Democrats want to at least have some standards here. They want to be able to, they want to stand for something in terms of morals. I mean, it's a pretty simple thing, right? You don't harass and abuse women,
mm,
and and so that's a pretty easy benchmark to meet, or it would seem to meet, and it should be certainly a bipartisan or a nonpartisan uh,
yeah,
approach. But the biggest contrast with the Republicans, of course, is taking a look at who's president of the United States and how he got reelected uh, with a very strong Republican base, uh, despite the fact that he had been found. Actually, he had been found liable in a civil lawsuit that E. Jean Carroll had bought,
mhm,
groping her in a department store, and a judge The judge in that has subsequently said that under New York state law, he was defined as a rapist essentially.
Mhm.
And then we have the numbers vary. It could be 20, 25, 28 women over the years who have accused him, often in very seriously credible ways, of assaulting them in various ways.
Right.
Those have been there, and yet, and I'm missing a few. And of course, the Epstein files. There's this thing about an underage girl
Mhm.
who was coerced into some kind of sexual act with him. And yet, Republicans to this day, including the very pious, religiously pious House Speaker Mike Johnson, they just kind of brush it
They
off
stick
or they
by 'em.
ignore it, and they don't want to deal with it. And
Yeah.
so I think the asymmetry that I was writing about was, one side wants to take the high road, and the other side just goes as low as it can. And I think the frustration, I suppose, perhaps for some Democrats, is that they're playing a game that the other side doesn't play, and he got reelected anyway. And I even pointed out
Mhm.
that the white women, as a group, as a demographic, the majority of them voted for him
Yeah.
in 2024, which of course is a whole separate, I think, discussion that one can have.
Yeah, we could talk about that for a long time for sure. Um, I think in fairness, I should point out that, Republican Tony Gonzalez had similar allegations raised against him recently, and, some prominent Republicans called for him to not run for reelection. So there is some standard there, I guess. It was not as, vociferous as what you described for,
I think the
Swalwell.
caveat, yeah, I think the only caveat there, or the wrinkle in that, was that those allegations came up in February, so it took 2 months for him to
Okay.
step down. And Mike Johnson, did said don't run for reelection, but Mike Johnson did not take a stand on him,
Mhm.
did not urge him to step down.
Yeah.
Um,
Obviously, the glaring exception to this rule would be Bill Clinton. So I think that sort of raises some questions about whether, the Democrats' sort of high road approach is a new thing, something that's developed recently. Do you have a sense of if that's
yes,
a change?
yes, yeah. I think they learned. I think they learned a lesson in that would have been 1998. And I wrote a lot about that when I was at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I
Mhm.
spent an entire year writing about that. Um, what happened actually also wasn't just Democrats um, who were sticking with Clinton despite what had happened, but it was also the leaders, feminists, leading feminists, the feminist movement, all supported him. And basically their attitude was, well, he's been good for women on policy,
Mm.
which was Kennedy was under constant. There were constant allegations about Senator Ted Kennedy over the years. But so I think now, uh, I think now, especially with women, more women are in politics, more women are being elected in Senate and Congress. I think it's much more of a front burner
Mm.
moral standard for Democrats. Um, one of the things we could also talk about, and I guess you'll ask the question, is why it took so long for the Swalwell rumors were there for
Yeah,
a long
exactly. It's,
time.
um
I'm sorry, you posed the question.
yeah, I think it seems to me now, it's not something I was aware of before, but since this story broke, other people who work in politics have said, "Yeah, I always heard he was kind of a sleaze." So, what do you I mean, I guess there've always been rumors, so at what point do people start asking really pointed questions, or are they responsible to ask pointed questions and make sure that the politicians we're elevating deserve deserve the role?
Mhm. Well, what happened there is, I think it's a classic example of how do you how do you what do you do with rumors? What do you do with gossip? What do you do with the buzz? How
Mhm.
serious do you take it? I mean, I think there was someone. in Politico. I think it was an article in Politico. A lobbyist in California told Politico that you know people saw what they wanted to see in him, and maybe they didn't ask the questions that they feared that they would that they feared
Mhm.
the answers. But people were asking Swalwell some questions, particularly people who were he was seeking their support in this California gubernatorial bid. They asked him, we know we've heard there's rumors. Are there any truth to the rumors? And he adamantly
Mhm.
said, no, there's nothing to them. He left no room for ambiguity. So at that point, and particularly I'm thinking of the press here, what does the press do about that when there was nobody on the time on the record, there were no
Yeah.
women on the record, there were no witnesses, no hotel receipts,
Yeah.
no camera footage, um, and
Yeah, and of course he's going to deny it. So at that point, I think it becomes more a question of like changing the dynamics in politics because so many women didn't want to come forward because their entire career was
Mhm.
rooted in his work, right? Or in working for him. So toppling him as a politician would have or even coming forward might have ruined their own careers. So
Well,
I think
that's what yes, I think that's what stopped a lot of them, and
yeah.
so yes, and so you're right, and so what people were left with, people in politics, insiders, and also particularly the press, what they were left with is what, a friend of mine who writes for the LA Times was saying uh, that there's a wide gulf. I'm trying to think how he put it, that there's a wide gulf between rumor and fact.
Mm,
And so how do you close that gap, and who's going to close that gap
yeah.
credibly? And what I think might happen, if I want to be optimistic about this, is that the way that women finally did come forward in this case, and the fact that the Democrats acted so swiftly, at least the Democrats act swiftly, is that over time, more women will feel that there isn't a stigma, or that there isn't a
Right.
big retaliatory culture
Mhm.
uh, if they do step forward.
Yeah.
And and one can say that maybe the women who came forward in his case were already encouraged by that the climate has been changing, and
Yeah. Yeah.
so
We can hope for sure. You shared a Dahlia Lithwick quote that Democrats play a game of righteous ball in which the object is pride and purity, and Dems are the only ones playing.
right.
And I think in this case, the point of that is that usually it hurts Democrats to stick to the rules while Republicans are not. I'm thinking mainly of Obama's opportunity to name a or to nominate a Supreme Court justice and not having that chance because Democrats were following along with Republicans' rules. So, do you think that Democrats are gaining the upper hand now by playing
Yeah,
playing a game of righteous ball
you
finally?
mean looking at it more broadly than just these cases, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is, this is one of the dilemmas I think that a lot of Democrats talk about all the time amongst themselves and argue with each other about is as well, should we have our issues and we have our policies, and this is what we need people to understand. And then there's another, wing of Democrats, another faction, I guess, who say, no, people, we have to get down and we have to slug it out, because
Mhm.
that's the only way to put the only way to put the Republicans back on their heels and to beat them. And I think that's playing out now a little bit in the broader sense of um, some Democrats are saying, we have to keep talking about impeaching Trump, and that
Mhm.
should be an issue in the midterm elections coming up in November,
Mhm.
even though we can't impeach Trump because they don't have control of the House right now. But to talk about that is to talk about the values of democracy
Mhm.
that we cannot afford to see diminished any further.
Right.
And then there's other Democrats who say, no, we have to talk about the economy and prices and affordability. And I don't really know the answer to that. I would like to think, well, why can't they do both? Um,
Mhm.
but I think it's there. What was that thing that Michelle Obama had said? I don't know, X number of years ago. When they go low, we go high.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think it means that I don't think it means by any means that Democrats have to start lying incessantly and being demagogues and smearing people personally, the way that the president of the United States seems to do daily.
Mhm.
Uh, but I think the idea of I think a lot of what Gavin Newsom's talking about California again. Gavin Newsom, the outgoing governor, regardless of what one thinks of him politically or whatever. I mean, I think that he has hit on a very good formula, just
Mhm.
daily hammering Trump on and the Republicans on social media. The
Yeah.
game is being played now on social media, and
Yeah.
and it's not croquet anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that's probably sort of a middle ground between high and low is at least that kind of consistent participation on social media, because if you're not present there, then I think it's a missed opportunity.
Oh,
But
totally.
do you think that this entire saga tells us anything about the future of Trump's Republican Party?
Uh, they when he made that joke X number of years ago about how he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and nobody would, never lose a vote. Uh, that still holds true. Still holds true in the sense I'd say not a week goes by where I see polls saying, "Oh, he's got a 38% approval rating right now as performance as president," and that's pretty low. That's
Mhm.
really low. But then when you look, I look to see what do self-identified Republicans where are they? And they're still like 85, 90%
Mhm.
supporting
Mhm.
him. So because I think we have these, maybe I use this term in that Swalwell piece, the tribalism
Yeah.
that's out there right now. It's like, we gotta, we have to defend our guy because this is all about power and nothing else. And we can't budge an inch. We can't admit we were wrong about him in any respect. Um, but,
Mhm.
but all right. But yes, he does have that base. The flip side or the sunny side, if I can maybe put it this way, is that when you look at what independent voters, so-called swing voters, their verdict on Trump is very low, is very harsh right now, particularly in the wake of the war in Iran
Mhm.
and the price of gasoline. Maybe nothing else is going to hit them except when they're putting gas in the tanks of their cars. Maybe that's all that matters to them. I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever it may be is fine by me. But and he's losing ground with some of the with two other cohorts that he's did well with in 2024. Young people, first time voters. He did
Mhm.
surprisingly well in 2024 with them in the election. But when you look now, they've peeled away from him by large margins. And the
Mhm.
same with he was making great gains with Hispanics. And you look now at what his ratings are with Hispanics, they've really plummeted too.
Yeah.
So the real question is who's going to vote? If we're talking 2026 is really, really important. Democrats need to take the House. It would put the skids on his policy agenda, such as it is. Um, the question is who's going to be highly motivated to turn out? And there are indications when polls do measure enthusiasm. Um, and his base is not very well motivated. They're still sticking with him, but they are not necessarily going to be coming out to vote in the kind of
Right.
percentages that Democrats and swing voting people um,
People
are.
who are angry will come out
Yeah,
and vote.
people are really angry. And if you look at any of the special elections, when there's been House seats that have been vacant that they have to fill them, sort of since 2024 up to now, there have been a number of special election races and a lot of state legislative races for open seats and stuff. And Democrats have won almost every one of them, and they've outperformed, as the words are,
Mhm.
the normal Democratic percentages in those districts. So, and I think Republicans at rank and file Republicans in Washington who are running for reelection from the House, for example, and even some in the Senate, they know that there's trouble right now.
Yeah.
But nobody seems willing to come out and say the president needs to change course. And the way he's stringing out what's going on right now in Iran, and
Mhm.
probably what he wants to do is probably changed twice since we started talking. So there's a lot of variables right now that Republicans are deeply worried about, and it's certainly, if nothing else, it's a really fascinating time to write about politics, and I've been doing it for a
Yeah.
very long time, and there's plenty there to keep me hooked.
Well, thank you so much. That was very informative. I appreciate you being on.
Okay, well, thanks, Monica. I appreciate you calling me, and anytime. Good luck with all this.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye bye.
And be sure to follow us on Gadfly City on YouTube and on Substack and at gadflycity.com.